In 2025 at PostHog, we've had 24,000 people apply for jobs. We've interviewed nearly 2,500 of them. Of those, we've done 357 super days, which are a paid work trial, and we've hired 103 people. There are two things we've observed throughout all of this madness. One, the candidates that ask the best questions usually get the furthest in the process. But two, hardly anyone asks the toughest questions, which frankly would be in their benefit. And that's what we're going to focus on today. In this studio right now, we've got David Newell. He's a seasoned engineer. He's going to be playing the part of a candidate doing an interview with me today. You've got the face right? Me, right? Not him? Cool. So, before we start, there are 3 caveats. 1, these questions are designed for interviews at early stage startups, often with the founders. It's probably a bad idea to ask the recruiter if their company has product market fit or not. It's just the wrong person to be talking to. 2, these questions are designed to be themes to ask around rather than a set playbook. They're not overly prescriptive. Don't ask 300 questions at the end of an interview, just rattling through them all. Ask them through the whole process, put them in naturally, and prioritize for yourself what you think matters here. And third, and finally, these questions are pretty tough. They're quite direct. Startups are screwed by default. That's why they're startups and not huge successful companies yet. And so if a startup can't handle you questioning some of the harder truths about their success or level of product market fit so far, then I'd question if you should even work there in the first place. So I would be judgmental of their reaction to these kind of questions. Okay, let's do this. Hello, David.
Hey, James. Do you have product market fit?
Okay, pause. So, finding product market fit is the single most important thing a company can do. It fully determines if they'll grow or even survive. There's a lot of information online about how to measure product market fit, how to tell if you've got it or not, including in our own newsletter. So I'm not going to go through any of that stuff in any depth here. But what I am going to do is give you some advice about some questions you could ask. If they don't have it, it's just very important to figure out if they have a plan to get there or not. So when you're asking questions, it's better to kind of probe the theme than it is to just ask the question outright. If you're interviewing in a company that's in its first year of its life, it's pretty unlikely to have product market fit already, or they're exceptionally lucky if they do. Here are a few of the types of questions that you could ask.
What problem are you trying to solve? What does your ideal customer look like? How will you know when you have product market fit? And what do you need to get to product market fit?
It's okay if the answers to your questions show that they don't have product market fit, and frankly, it's better if they have an awareness of it. What matters is if they have a plan to solve that problem. If you're interviewing with a company that's a little bit further along, like maybe they're 2 years in or more, here are a few of the types of questions that you could ask.
Do you ever question if you have product market fit? When did you achieve product market fit, and how did you know? What does activation look like, and how is it measured in your product? What does your growth rate look like right now?
And so if you're getting kind of evasiveness or super vague responses, or just the numbers really low, like no revenue, no real users, people aren't coming back, then it's pretty likely that the company doesn't have product market fit. And just bear in mind, most people are overly optimistic, realistically, that they want their thing to work. Founders have to be one of two things. Either one, they're brutally honest with themselves and with their team that they don't have product market fit, because if they're not honest, they can't have a plan to solve the problem. Or two, if they do have product market fit, they should be really clear on why. This is actually a question that David asked me in real life when we actually interviewed. You asked about this theme. At this point, I think we had about 4.5 million run rate. We had loads and loads of users. And so really simplistically, as you probably remember, I just showed David the graph of our usage and our revenue over time, which I thought was the clearest example, a good old-fashioned hockey stick graph going up and to the right. And I thought this was a nice way of being transparent rather than him having to kind of trust me, I got this, bro, when we've never met before. So remember, it's really normal not to have product market fit as an early stage startup. That's why they are a startup, but you're looking for clarity. Clarity that they don't have it, and if they don't, that they've got a game plan to solve it. Anyway, let's move on to another theme.
Are you default alive?
So that's a great question. It's essentially about company survival, right? Companies that don't have product market fit are going to need time to get there. And so if you ask questions like, are you default alive? It'll help you figure out how much runway is left. The term default alive was coined by YC god Paul Graham. What it means is, if you are default alive, you're going to get to profitability before you run out of cash, assuming that your growth rate and your spending remain constant. So if I were interviewing, I would ask a bunch of follow-up questions, a little bit more like this.
Oh,
Sorry. What's your runway? What kind of assumptions do you have behind it? And do you have any fundraising plans at all? Do you see what I did there?
Yeah, all good.
What constitutes enough runway will really depend on the nature of the problem that the company's trying to solve. So for example, like if they're trying to build a rocket to go to the moon or something, they're going to need a little bit more time than a software company. And it also depends on your personal attitude towards risk. You might be fine taking a risk with your next move, or you may not, depending on your level of excitement and how much money you've got and so on too. Companies should know if their default are live or not, because if they do not have product market fit, they're going to need as much time as possible to get it. And so it's a really critical piece of information to have in your head when you're building a company or making decisions day to day. Anyway, that's a bunch about default live. Why don't we go to another question theme?
How do I make an impact at your company?
So there are good and bad ways to probe this theme. Asking something like what keeps you up at night, this will give you a good grip on what the hardest problems are that the company faces. It gives you a chance to kind of talk a bit about maybe how you could solve them. But on the other hand, just beware if you ask this question kind of more like, what will I be working on? What am I going to be doing? Because in an early stage startup, generally everyone is looking for people to be drivers rather than passengers. And so if you sound like you're going to need a lot of direction, the interviewer may assume that you'd be better suited in a bigger company where you're kind of slotted into a much clearer kind of space overall. To further explore this theme, you could also ask,
so what are the hardest problems that you're working on right now? What problems are you able to ignore today? And is there anything that users are really complaining about right now?
So the goal here is to find out what the company needs to solve and if you could even help, all while carefully demonstrating that you're proactive and you're a good fit for the role in the first place. So the next question is about the team.
How did you find your earliest hires? How do you attract and retain like some of the best people in the company? How do you compensate and reward the team? And do you share board slides with the team?
So the team is really, really important. So it's a great idea to ask these sorts of questions. You should be listening for thoughtful answers about how to hire and pay people. These are signs that the founding team care about the quality of people who are working at their startup. Because if they don't have a product or traction yet because they're early, the group of people and the way they work together is all they have. Another flag to watch for is if founders talk about the big companies that a bunch of their team have worked at, like if they're proud of the fact that they have lots of people from Amazon or Google or Netflix or Facebook. This is actually an anti-pattern to successful startups in the earliest stages. Having a bunch of really expensive employees who are better at working at a ton of scale, those aren't the problems that you have early on. You want as much runway as possible, so having a ton of expensive people is a bad idea. But moreover, you want scrappy, fast people. And those that, if they do talk about the qualities in their team that they admire, you really should be listening for kind of scrappiness or speed. The other thing to consider is, as you're going through the process yourself, would you see another person who's at least as strong or stronger than you also wanting to go for a role in this place? Because if that's the case, they're more likely to be successful if it's got a strong team, and you're going to at least learn a lot more yourself. Anyway, let's move on to the next section, which is culture.
What's the culture like at PostHog?
Oof. That's not my favorite question, David. It's pretty low leverage. Try these instead.
What are the company values and why? Can you give me some specific ways that you follow the company values? Who decides what to build? What does a typical workday look like? What are the things or behaviors that would cause a person to fail in this role?
So you can keep those. The first thing I would say is just look for intentionality. Like, is the culture being designed proactively because it's part of the company as a product, basically? There are a bunch of red flags, as usual, so let's dive into them. Number one is if it's a founder dictatorship. This doesn't work nearly all the time because unless the founder is someone like Steve Jobs, who is a perfect visionary of what should be built, it's going to be a team effort to get to product market fit, and you probably don't want to work in a dictatorship, and maybe you do. But it's something you should be aware of if you're walking into it. The second red flag is a ton of process and bureaucracy. Startups do not win on being cautious. Everything should be upside oriented. How do we play offense? How do we go out there and get that big opportunity? And so if all their focus is on compliance and things that like a two-person startup doesn't need to prioritize yet, they're probably focusing on the wrong things. If no one cares, they don't have product market fit, nothing else is relevant. And finally, if it's obvious that no one's even thinking about the type of company they want to build, it shows a lack of care and thoughtfulness and frankly intelligence on the behalf of the company. Okay, we're going to move on to our final section. It's important to double check the motivation and long-term goals of the founder to see if they fit with your own.
Why did you start the company in the first place? Is there something that you're super proud of so far? Do you plan on selling the company to exit?
These are all great questions, right? To help check if you're on the same page with each other. Go through them a little bit more specifically. It's totally valid for a company to want to sell, but it shouldn't come as a surprise to you as someone who's about to join as an employee. Another good way to get some information here is to ask something like, what is your company strategy and why is that the case? Another thing to consider is that A lot of startups will fail because the co-founders break up. So feel free to ask stuff like, what are you doing to avoid co-founder breakup? It's a really valid thing to ask. Finally, remember the success of the company in the long run is the product of its vision today. And so if that vision isn't clear and it doesn't make sense to you as they're describing it, it's not going to make sense to anyone else, whether that's investors, customers, or the rest of their team. Joining a team that knows where they want to go and ideally how they're going to get there is in their interest, and it's also in your own. Anyway, it's a lot of chat. I think it's time for the big conclusion. There are 3 things you need to remember about interviewing at a startup. Number 1, you're interviewing at a startup. There's much more chance stuff goes horribly wrong and sideways with their company. So make sure you de-risk and you get a better grip on, do I believe this company has the right kind of people and culture and ideas and attitude to succeed long term? Because you're not going to be successful in a company that dies. 2, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Before you get to the successful outcome and company and even the correct strategy, it's the people and the way people work together is the starting point for the whole thing. Without those conditions, you're much less likely to be successful. And 3rd, it's about who you are, not who you know. We said earlier we hired 103 people so far this year at PostHog. Of those, it may surprise you, over 70% had no referral whatsoever. They literally just filled out the form online. So whatever you do, don't get imposter syndrome. We hire at least at PostHog people from all over the world with all kinds of experience. So just fill out the form. There is literally no downside, and go for it. Have fun.